over to Secretary Simon.
Okay, can you hear me and see me okay? Okay, thank you everyone for being here. Good morning. Tomorrow's obviously a big day. It really isn't election day per se. It's the last day on which we vote. It's no longer the day that we vote, it's the last day that we vote. And it's a process that started on September 18th when Minnesota and South Dakota kicked it off for the rest of the country. We're tied for the two states with the longest absentee voting period. So again, tomorrow's not the day we vote, it's the last day we vote. It's really an election period, not an election day. Nonetheless, it will be consequential tomorrow for a lot of reasons. A lot of people will decide to go in person. So I wanted to open up with the numbers, the latest numbers as of this morning. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about the 8th Circuit lawsuit and the downstream effects there. And then I wanted to finish up with some talk about some polling place issues, including some that have emerged, or one in particular that has emerged just today. And then afterwards, we can take whatever questions you want. So in terms of the numbers, here are the latest as of the last half hour. Here are the numbers when you combine the absentee ballots plus those who live in mail-only precincts. And again, for those who haven't been on prior calls, Minnesota has had a law since 1987 that allows all non-metro area townships and allows cities with fewer than 400 registered voters, not people, registered voters, cities in those categories and townships in that category, they may, at their option, ditch their polling places and go to a mail-only system where all of their registered voters automatically, even without asking, get a ballot. So that's what I mean by the mail-only precincts. And we have roughly over 200,000 people in Minnesota, voters, not just people, 200,000 voters who at least live in those jurisdictions. Now, that's not to say they'll all vote, but those are who would qualify to vote in those jurisdictions. So if you combine absentee ballots and the mail-only ballots, we are now at 2,055,519 in terms of requests. That's 2,055,519. The number of those that are accepted is 1,716,575. So 1,716,575. That, in case you're interested, amounts to 58% of the 2016 turnout. So we're already at 58%. The delta there, the difference, in case you're doing the math, is 338,944. In other words, that's the number of outstanding absentee ballots. A word or two about that figure. First of all, there's been some backlog over the weekend, which is traditional and which is standard. So it might not, as of half an hour or an hour ago, reflect the true up-to-date number. Second, we expect to give you a report later today, probably early this evening, I'm guessing, sometime this evening, which will reflect all the catch-up work that was done over the weekend, plus presumably all the administrative work done in 87 counties today. Bottom line, you'll get another number today. But as of this morning, close to first thing this morning, that was the number of outstanding absentee ballots. It's the difference between the application number that I just mentioned and the accepted ballots number that I just mentioned. That's 338,944. So that's the number. Let me talk a little bit about the lawsuit. And again, for those who weren't on the previous calls or people maybe from outside of Minnesota who were on this call, we had the 8th Circuit decision come down on the evening of last Thursday with a decision that was, in my view, unnecessary and unnecessarily disruptive. But it is what it is for now. And it basically said that Minnesota, all jurisdictions in Minnesota have to segregate ballots that come in after 8 p.m. on election day. We had a consent decree in place in Minnesota since early August that withstood even our statewide primary on August 11th. A consent decree and a set of rules agreed to by all political parties and communicated frequently to voters that said that voters had up till election day to postmark their ballots and then mail it in. The court went as far as saying that anything coming in after that date, time and date, 8 p.m. on election night, would have to be segregated. The court did not say that they would be invalidated. The court did, however, tip its hat a bit and said that anyone who would seek to invalidate ballots in those piles would have, in its words, a likelihood of success on the merits. So they would have, in layperson's term, a pretty good shot is what the 8th Circuit was saying. We don't know how big that pile will be. Obviously, that depends on a lot of factors between now and then, but that's the gist of the lawsuit. So we, as you know, last Friday, in conjunction with the Attorney General's office, decided not to seek a stay before the U.S. Supreme Court. There were a lot of reasons for that. I really prefer not to go into the particulars of legal strategy, except to say, anytime that you decide to bring it up to something like the US Supreme Court, you have to ask yourself, what is the downside risk? Not just not getting the relief that you sought, but could you end up possibly in a worse position, worse than just not getting the relief that you sought, if you do that. So we had to factor that into our decision, but that's not the end of it, obviously. We need to live to fight another day. And the other day is the litigation that could come after the election. Namely, if somebody, some campaign, some political party seeks to invalidate the ballots in the segregated pile. And so that's what we need to be focused on, making sure that every ballot in Minnesota that's lawfully cast is counted, period, for every office. That's our focus and will continue to be our focus, by the way, not just in the courts, but outside of the courts as well. The stakes are high. And, I think the basics of the litigation are, if the margin in Minnesota is wide, there will be less likelihood of litigation. If the margin in Minnesota is slim, there will be more likelihood of litigation. I can't really quantify it beyond that. We'll have to see what happens on election night tomorrow night and what those initial returns are. Because of that Thursday evening decision, we did, as I foreshadowed on Friday, direct the ad agency with whom we partnered on a nonpartisan voter outreach message to tailor and change its message, and they have done that over the last 3 or 4 days. We've also partnered with countless nonpartisan partners out there on voter outreach to make sure that all constituencies and audiences understand this late changing court-induced change of the rules. And so we've done everything we can through the weekend without stop to communicate that message to partners and anyone with any size megaphone who reaches any voters, regardless of political position, regardless of party, regardless of political affiliation or orientation, and regardless of area of the state. So that's been very important for us. We need to focus on that, the goal of everyone understanding the rules and everyone making sure that their votes count. There will be time for detailed recriminations and a catalog of disappointments of the court ruling later, but we just don't have the luxury of that right now. So we're focused on that. I also, in keeping with what I've been saying, want to use this time to say yet again, it may be redundant, but it doesn't matter, what voters should do if they have an absentee ballot in hand or if they think it's still on its way to them. The first thing they should do, if they still have it in hand, is not put it in the mail, obviously. Do not put it in the mail because it has to arrive to make sure that it's counted, has to arrive by tomorrow. So the options for those folks are to either vote in person today at a county or city office. They can vote in person today by absentee during business hours. And to find out where that is, they can go to mnvotes.org. That's our website, mnvotes.org. Or they can go in tomorrow and vote at their polling place. We urge folks to check where their polling place is. It might have changed. There's a possibility that it changed. And I'll get to that in a little bit when I talk about polling place issues. So they should check that and they should go in and they can vote there. It's okay to do. People change their minds all the time, and Minnesota law accommodates that change of heart. So people can order an absentee ballot even before this court case and think the better of it and think that they don't need it anymore, and they can leave it on their coffee table and they can override or preempt that vote, if you will, by going in and voting in person. The same sorts of rules apply to someone who maybe has already sent that ballot in. So let's talk about the Minnesotan who perhaps has sent the ballot in Thursday morning, just a few hours before the Thursday evening decision by the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals. What should they do if they're not sure it's even gotten there yet? Well, first they should go to mnvotes.org to our Ballot Tracker feature and see whether it's gotten in over the weekend and see even yet today whether it's gotten in. Or if they can't wait, don't want to wait, or otherwise don't see their ballot as having arrived, they can override that in-transit ballot. Let me repeat that, very important. They can override the in-transit ballot. If the ballot is out there in the ether, the ballot is on its way somehow from point A to point B. It hasn't been tracked as received yet by a particular county or city. They can go in either today or tomorrow and override it. There's nothing wrong with that. That's not considered voting twice. And the reason it isn't is because there's a barcode attached to every single ballot that connects that ballot and that intended voter with the ballot. And so that will just be canceled. The in-transit ballot upon voting in person will be canceled. Think about it like a canceled check in a commercial situation. And so there's no harm, there's no problem with doing that at all. It happens all the time, even under the best of circumstances, even under normal circumstances. So anyone can check that and they can override the in-transit ballot. The ballot then, once it arrives a day or 2 or 3 or 4 or several days later, that will not count. It will be invalidated and there's no harm, no foul. So that happens not infrequently. And that's a strategy that voters should employ if they've already sent it in and either they don't know whether it's been received or they affirmatively check and see that it has not been received. So you can override that in-transit ballot. Very, very important. So that's what voters should do. I should point out that hand delivery can be effected until 3 p.m. tomorrow. So all business hours today, but only until 3 p.m. tomorrow election day, not 5 p.m., not 8 p.m., the time of close. 3 p.m. is when hand delivery can be effected, either by handing it directly to a human being or by putting one's own ballot in a drop box. Very important. Tomorrow, Tuesday, 3 p.m. So that's what voters should do. I want to talk a little bit about polling places. There's one in particular emerging issue, but I want to open by saying that some have moved. The legislature, at our urging, wisely, I think, allowed for more time this year to fix polling places because of COVID. So there are some in communities that have moved because they were beforehand in some vulnerable spots, senior and assisted living facilities, nursing homes and the like. So I urge everyone who has a doubt about where their polling place is to go to mnvotes.org, go to the poll finder feature, type in your address, and up will come the place that you should go to vote tomorrow, election day. I want to say a word about PPE. We had a great dress rehearsal in the primary where we had PPE and supplies, and we've augmented and supplemented even what we did in the primary. And the reviews by election workers and voters were really, really good. It was a great dry run. It was a great dress rehearsal. We have spent, again, the time, energy, and money to purchase and distribute to all 3,000 Minnesota polling places sufficient quantities and quality of PPE and supplies, including high-grade masks for all election workers, disposable masks for voters, hand sanitizer, pumps, wipes, disinfectants, and some supplemental products as well. Some jurisdictions have chosen to use some money that came through our office from the federal government to purchase pens, for example. Others have used it to purchase face shields. And I want to give a quick shout out here and some praise to two particularly valuable corporate partners who have augmented and allowed us to augment the supplies and PPE. First, I want to thank the Minnesota Vikings. The Minnesota Vikings donated some money so that we could supplement and augment to counties and cities across the state what we provided in the primary. Thank you to the Minnesota Vikings for the team's generosity and public spiritedness. I also want to thank Anderson Windows. Anderson Windows, without a lot of fanfare, helped us to provide tens of thousands of face shields. That was an item that wasn't everywhere during the primary, but we had some call after the primary in many jurisdictions, but not all, to provide those. And that was made possible by a grant of Anderson Windows. So I want to thank those two great corporate citizens and for their public service and help in that regard. I want to talk a little bit about election judges. This is an issue I haven't touched on recently, and for good reason, which is that it's been the absence of problems, not the presence of problems. It's no secret to anyone on this call that there are jurisdictions outside of Minnesota in this country during the primary season that faced chronic shortages of election judges. Think about Wisconsin, think about Georgia, think about other states where some of the long lines at the polling place were attributable, at least in part, and in some cases in large part, to chronic and last-minute understaffing. That is something that really concerned us. We typically in our office do not play a direct role in the recruitment or retention of election judges. It's counties, cities, and townships that hire, train, and pay them, not us. But we thought we had a responsibility in our office to at least have their backs. So we convened a number of meetings throughout the state with counties, with cities, brainstorming sessions, if you will, on how during a pandemic they might retain most of their usual standbys and also seek out new people to do that very important job. And thanks to them, and thanks in particular to the 30,000 people who have stepped up this year at some risk to themselves. I can't say it enough. If you go into a polling place tomorrow and you see an election judge, thank that person. They're really doing an extraordinary thing, even under the best of circumstances, even during usual or normal times. But this year, they're really going above and beyond. And so please do as I plan to do, and I hope many of you will. thank that person for their service. It's a tremendous service, a very important one for our democracy in Minnesota. We need 30,000 poll workers, 30,000, that's a small army. And it's very difficult in a time of a pandemic to get people to do that job, but people have really, really stepped up. And I just want to say a word about that. A couple security related issues I just wanted to touch on. One is the ongoing saga of Atlas Aegis, which is the Tennessee-based company, which a couple, 2-3 weeks ago posted the job posting calling for former military members to come to Minnesota to guard polling places. As I'm sure you know, last week, that was basically stopped by action of the Attorney General's office, thanks to Attorney General Ellison and his staff for moving so quickly. There was also a private lawsuit brought by CARE and by the League of Women Voters. That too resulted in a court order. So that particular episode or instance has been more or less put to bed. But I think I just want to use this opportunity to speak more broadly and repeat again what I've said about what the rules are in Minnesota. We have a 100-foot perimeter in Minnesota. No one is allowed within 100 feet of the entrance of a polling place unless statute in particular says that they're supposed to be there. Private security or those seeking to supplement or augment law enforcement or to somehow help them is expressly not included in that list. So anyone showing up with that purpose will not be allowed within that 100-foot perimeter. As for those who think they're helping and are 101 feet outside of the perimeter, we have very specific and sweeping laws, I would say, both at the state and federal level that address voter intimidation. And I think law enforcement and others are on notice about that prospect and possibility. But in Minnesota, we've had a really good record over the years of tranquil, peaceful, thoughtful polling places, and I expect that to continue. You always hope for the best and plan for the worst, and we are planning for the worst with law enforcement partners. But I have to say, I think we've gotten the word out, and others have as well, about what the rules are. So anyone thinking that they're helping and showing up will just not show up. That's our hope, at least. Finally, I want to address something a couple of you have tweeted this out this morning. There's a new development. Apparently, the Department of Justice, as I understand it, and I'm just learning about this as no advance notice at all. The Department of Justice has said that it is sending people to 44 jurisdictions, including, as I understand it, Minneapolis, on the list of 44, to monitor voting compliance issues. I'm not sure what that means. We're trying to run that to ground in our office. All I can tell you is what Minnesota law says about access to the polling place. And the specific law is 204C.06. If you look at 204C.06, it's very explicit and very clear about who is allowed in. And law enforcement is not allowed in unless by invitation. There's no, at least under Minnesota law, there's no automatic right of law enforcement to go in for any purpose into a polling place unless they are invited in. Now that may be an issue for the city of Minneapolis, whether they will consent to some sort of invitation for those law enforcement officials. But other than that, at least under state law and absent any independent federal authority that I'm not yet aware of, I don't understand how federal observers from the Department of Justice will be afforded automatic access to a polling place in Minneapolis or any place else. But we'll have to see how the city of Minneapolis responds. But our statute, and you can read it for yourself, 204C.06, is quite clear on who is and isn't involved, and it even explicitly mentions law enforcement. So I just wanted to touch on that as well. And just conclude by saying I remain an optimist. Minnesota is #1 in voter turnout for a reason. That's not an accident. It's not dumb luck. It's not a coincidence. We will always find a way to vote in Minnesota, and we always do, even in a once-in-a-century pandemic. And I think we're going to do that again tomorrow. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Secretary Simon. Our first question will go to Mary. And just a reminder for everyone, if you could tell us the outlet that you are with, that would be greatly helpful to us.
Okay. Hi, can you hear me? Mary LaHammer, Twin Cities PBS. Secretary of State Simon, you just mentioned Minnesota being #1 in voter turnout. I don't know if you heard that the Colorado elections director erroneously claimed that they were going to be the first state to ever reach 80% voter turnout. I believe your records show 1956, we reached 83. Do you suspect we will surpass that 83% and surpass 80 in general? What's your prediction on voter turnout?
I did see the Colorado election director's tweet. He's awesome. He's an amazing guy. He's a national authority, very well respected. I just think with respect, he was wrong on this one. You're right. Minnesota in the 1950s and 56 did get to about 83. So our modern day high was 2008. In 2008, we were at about 77%. I'm rounding a little bit. 4 years ago in Minnesota, we were just shy of 75%. We were at 74.7%. I think it is entirely possible that we beat the modern day record. Will we reach the coveted 80% threshold? I'm not sure. I would say it's possible. I'm always loath to make specific predictions. I know some of my predecessors would do that. Joan Grow notably would, I think, over the years make specific predictions, but I haven't done that. All I know is it's pretty electric out there right now, on all sides, by the way. Equal opportunity electricity. I think on the left, right, red, blue, people are fired up to vote. So it would not surprise me for us to smash the 77% modern day mark and perhaps exceed, even bust past the 80% cap. Whether we'll get to 83, wow, I don't know. That's pretty tremendous. I don't know, but all of these are within the realm of possibility. Absolutely. I do think that it's quite likely we'll do better than we did 4 years ago, meaning more than 74.7%. That's as much as I'm prepared to say.
Next question goes to Brian Bax to NPR.
Secretary Simon,
Hi.
you've said multiple times, including just now, that it's your intention to count the absentee ballots that come in after November 3rd and add them to tallies, segregate them for potential litigation later. What can you say about the dynamic that has? Because typically it's about, this post-litigation is about which votes get added, not subtracted from the totals. What do you think that does to public perception?
You know, it's anyone's guess, but a reasonable guess is that it would add to the perception that someone's trying to take away validly cast votes. That's the perception. And if anyone is going to invalidate a vote of a Minnesotan, they're going to know which votes and which contests are impacted up and down the ballot. It's going to be some bloodless exercise where they can guess about its impact. They're going to have to step up, and if they want to pull that trigger, they're going to have to know each and every impact up and down the ballot in every jurisdiction and every corner in the state.
Next question goes to Megan, and what outlet are you with, please?
Hello, I'm Megan, and I'm with KEYC News Now here in southern Minnesota. Hello, Secretary Simon. I just wanted you to speak to, kind of piggybacking off of the last question, but though it may be obvious, can you speak to the repercussions that may result from deciding to segregate those ballots, and what impact that would ultimately have on knowing the election results?
Well, thank you for the question. I think that it so much depends on what someone does in litigation after the election. The court was clear in the Eighth Circuit that nothing happens automatically other than segregation. For anyone to invalidate a ballot, they are going to have to step up and pull the trigger. They are going to have to step up and ask the court to specifically invalidate certain ballots that are in that pile. And given what I just said in response to Brian Bax's question, we're going to make sure that that the counties count all of those ballots for all of the contests. So you're going to know when you invalidate a ballot what that really means up and down the ballot all over Minnesota. But again, we don't know, to be fair, whether someone will pursue that post-election litigation. Again, I'm guessing that the wider the margin in the presidential race, either way, the less likelihood of litigation, and the smaller margin, the more likelihood. And that's, you know, an ultra obvious point, I realize, but it just probably bears repeating. So we just don't know. It all depends, in my judgment, on the margin as of late on Tuesday night.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Next question goes to Alexa from Wall Street Journal.
Hi, Secretary. Thanks for doing this. I had a question about the order of when we'll know partial results. You know, there's talk of like a mirage or red or blue in some states. What's the order of when early in-person votes you expect to report versus absentee and then election day?
Well, typically in Minnesota, there is no segregation by type of vote. So everything that's reported on election night, when you see a number for candidate A or candidate B in jurisdiction C, it includes everything together. There isn't a separate count in a county for how many voted for candidate A and B who voted in person versus how many voted for candidate A or B who voted before election day in any way. So they are all commingled all the time. What I tell you is we do expect that election night returns later on election night will reflect, of course, everyone who voted that day, and it will also reflect all or substantially all of the people who have voted up until that time, meaning they either voted in person before election day or their ballots have been received and processed and counted as of that time. I say substantially all. because you never know what glitches come up. And the legislature did provide an extra 2 days after the election, kind of a cushion, given the surge in absentee ballots. I think they wisely provided a 2-day cushion so that they are allowed to count even things that came in by 8 p.m. on election night. They are given 48 hours to count those. So they have that time period if they need it. And some of them, just given volumes, given the state of affairs in the counties, you know, personnel on hand, things like that, it may go into the next day or even the next 2. But I do believe that all or substantially all of those absentee ballots will be reflected in the election night returns. But again, they will all be commingled. They won't be broken out in any way.
Thank you. Next question goes to Michael, and repeat your outlet, please. Maybe we'll give him a second. Okay, we'll circle back. Next question goes to Amy from Workday, Minnesota.
Hi, thank you. Hi, Secretary Simon. So you said there are 30,000 election judges going to be working in Minnesota tomorrow at 3,000 polling places, and that it's an important part of democracy. I know that Minneapolis received an unprecedented amount of applications for poll workers this year. What do you think could be driving their motivation to become frontline election workers during the pandemic?
You know, that's a great question. I think community-wide, meaning all of us who do this work and those non-governmental partners who care about elections and voting, have done a really good job of putting out a call to service since the spring. I mean, when I and we saw some of those scenes from some of the states that I mentioned earlier and others, very long lines attributable at least in part and sometimes in large part to a chronic and last-minute lack of staffing, we took notice, and so did they. So community-wide in the elections administration community, I think a call to action went out early, like this spring, this summer, that we're really going to need people, that you can't just count on the usual standbys, particularly because of the usual outstanding, excellent standbys who tend to populate those jobs. They also tend disproportionately to be seniors and retirees. And there's no problem with that other than that they're in a more vulnerable group when it comes to COVID, and for good reason might want to opt out this year. And so knowing that, I think a lot of people and a lot of hands are responsible for planning early and making sure that local jurisdictions went to extraordinary lengths to find people beyond their usual standbys this year, whether that was at schools, community groups, local employers, and others. We heard a lot of really creative and innovative tales from our partners in counties and cities about how they really hit the pavement really and worked really hard to fill those spots this year.
Thank you. Next question is from Steve Karnowski at the AP. Steve writes, do you have figures for how many people have already asked to spoil their absentee ballots so they could vote in person? And do you have any estimate of how many people might do so today and tomorrow?
Steve, it's a great question. It's hard to quantify. What I can tell you is that the number that I reported to you at the top, the roughly 338, just shy of 339,000 people, that does, at least so far, reflect people. Let me put it this way. It does not include people who ordered an absentee ballot and decided to go in and vote. So it accounts for them, I should say. They're not in that number, but it accounts for them. They're expressly excluded from that number. There may be some lag over the weekend. That is typical. Saturdays and Sundays, now that everyone's full on Monday, they're probably going to start processing a lot of those. So that number will go down naturally, plus a lot of people who vote in person today, plus a lot of people whose ballots arrive today by mail. So the number will continue to go down. At what rate, I'm not sure. I hope I'm answering your question, but that's the best we can do for now. And that was as of about an hour before this meeting.
Thank you. Next question comes from Taylor with CNN. Can you speak about the petition to dismiss the challenge to the 7-day ballot acceptance? She's referring to filings this morning. Can you give a summary of what this says, what its purpose is, and why the office has decided to do this?
This is about the Supreme Court
Yes.
case? Okay. Yeah, well, that was a case brought by the Donald J. Trump for President campaign, seeking certain relief. I think their contention seems to be that it's moot at this point in light of the Eighth Circuit decision. Our argument is that it's not moot because there are things that would happen after the election that could make it not moot. I mean, that's the best I can do. So we don't see it as moot. We see it as a parallel proceeding, and we want to keep going and have the Minnesota Supreme Court ultimately weigh in on this.
Thank you. Next question comes from Stephen Montemayor with the Minneapolis Star Tribune. Can you speak to any updates on the performance of Minnesota's statewide voter registration system as of this morning?
Yes, and thank you, Stephen, for that. As some of you know, there was a glitch in the system on Saturday. I want to emphasize about that glitch, though. As unfortunate as it was, it did not impact any voter's ability to vote. That's very, very important. It did impact elections administrators trying to process all those votes, but it did not and would not impact any person's ability to vote on Saturday. It's been fixed. We put it through the paces this morning, early, I think this morning at 6 a.m. this morning and 6 a.m. yesterday morning, Sunday morning. We partnered with some counties and cities just to make sure everything was working even before the day started and people would come in to vote. And it seems to be working satisfactorily. So we're confident that things are going smoothly right now. And we have no reason to believe that there will be any other glitch.
Thank you. Just a gentle reminder to folks to please mute your lines. The next question goes to Sarah with KTTC. You can unmute, Sarah.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. So can you talk to me about how does same-day registration work? Is that something that voters can still do this year?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Minnesota was one of the first in the country to have it. We're still one of only, I think, 16 states to have it. And it's a huge advantage. I mean, it's sort of the jewel in the crown of our election laws, in my opinion. And it allows anybody who either isn't registered, somebody maybe who is never registered, someone whose registration, they haven't voted in years and their registration somehow lapsed, or anyone who needs to refresh or change their registration because they moved or had a name change or the like, they can do that at the polling place on election day. And really, as with any time a person registers, it's really about showing two things. You are who you say you are, and you live where you say you live. That's it. That's it. It's not more complicated than that. And any voter can go to our website, mnvotes.org, and see that there are long lists of things that qualify to show either or both of those. So it's not just a current Minnesota driver's license bearing your current address. That would be wonderful if everyone could do it that way, but that's just not reality. So it's a long list on both ends that you are who you say you are and that you live where you say you live. And I think Minnesota has been really forward thinking in making it easier, not harder to register by providing more opportunities and more things that can qualify for either or both of those showings.
Thank you. Next question from Emily with CARE. Could the Eighth Circuit's ruling jeopardize any votes that are cast in person after 8 p.m. on Tuesday? Example, someone who was in line by 8 but cast their ballot by 8:30.
No, that's a really fair question and a good one. No, but by operation of statute, anyone who is in line at 8 p.m. can vote and is deemed to have voted within the legal time frame. It's a totally fair question, but I'm not concerned about that. Anyone in line in Minnesota at 8 p.m. must be counted, must be given the opportunity to vote, even if it's a minute later, an hour later, or more.
Thank you. Next question from Esme Murphy.
Unmuted. Can you hear me now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I have a bunch of questions here about these outstanding ballots because I think there's a lot of confusion out there. Are you going to have, after Tuesday night, are you going to have two sets of results running up and down? Are you going to add them to the total? What direction are you giving counties in terms of holding these things? And you mentioned the overall vote total, that maybe if it's so big, we won't need it. But what about the legislative races? I mean, there are many, many races in these ballots that are decided by, 100 or a few thousand votes.
Yeah, well, let me take, Esme, the last part first. The Eighth Circuit decision, as far as we can tell, I wish they had been more clear and more explicit, but as far as we can tell, only applies at this point to the presidential race. The court signals, though, without saying, that it is possible that those representing other interests in other races, particularly federal races, could seek of a court somewhere the opportunity to invalidate ballots. Again, there's a lack of specificity there that I certainly find frustrating, and I think voters will as well. But at this moment, it only applies to the race for president. As for separate counts, no, we don't plan to do that. We plan to treat it as we always were going to, as a rolling total of validly cast votes. So there will be, as we have pledged, an update at the end of the day Wednesday, an update at the end of the day Thursday, Friday, and so on until the next day, Tuesday, November 10th. And we're going to continue doing that. If a litigant wants to invalidate ballots and do the forensic work, I guess, if you will, it's not really forensic, but you know what I mean, the number crunching work to figure out the ballots that they want to back out, we're going to be segregating them so they don't have to figure that out. The physical ballots will be segregated and the vote counts, but we're not going to be doing, separate vote tallies. It will be a running total through Tuesday, November 10th.
Okay, but will you have the presidential though as a separate tally, or just put it all in?
All in.
Okay.
All in.
And are you worried? I mean, this sounds like this is a potential mess after the election with potential lawsuits. People trying to invalidate certain races or saying that the Eighth Circuit was saying this. I mean, are you concerned about that?
I am concerned that the Eighth Circuit decision created a situation where after the fact of an election, knowing what the vote returns are, someone could make the calculated decision to invalidate a certain pile of ballots. So far, the court has only addressed the situation with respect to the presidential campaigns. The courts, it is possible that a litigant out there, someone could sue and argue that the court's analysis applies beyond just the presidential election, that it applies to other contests. That hasn't happened so far, but unfortunately has left open at least that possibility. It's not for me to say or even guess what the court will do. Obviously, we at every step of the way, along with the Attorney General's office, will be arguing the opposite. You can count on that. But I don't know what litigants from what corners of the state or what political parties will say. That is what the Eighth Circuit has created.
The state results, though, on all these state legislative races, as far as you're concerned, those can't be affected. Those can't be touched. Those can't become, people can't come back with a lawsuit after that. Those are all safe. Just states.
I would say, Esme, that's what our argument has been and will continue to be for legal reasons. The way that these plaintiffs said they had standing, meaning even the ability to sue, was a creative legal argument about the fact that they were both Republican electors pledged to President Trump. And therefore, that got them in the door to be able to sue, gave them standing, conferred standing upon them, and the court bought that argument 2-1. And so, our legal argument would be, and would continue to be, that unless you have the standing of these two particular plaintiffs, and tied to this particular contest of presidents of the United States, yes, our legal argument will be that it shouldn't affect any other pile of ballots. I will tell you, I don't know what this court will do. I can't predict.
Okay, I just want one more question. Are you telling voters that might get their ballots in, hey, your ballots might not count in the presidential race. We think they're going to count in statewide races and local legislative races, but we can't be sure?
That's a fair question. I mean, in essence, that is what we're saying. We're saying we hope and expect they will count for everything else. I don't know what this court will do. This court has already gone farther than maybe any other court in the country to do what it did. It went to great lengths and pains to reach the result that it did. Skipping over arguments, altering, if not abandoning, other legal doctrines to get there. So I don't know, Esme, what lengths this court will do to get to a particular result.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. I just want to verify from John Croman with CARE. John wrote, I believe the Eighth Circuit ruling only applies to absentee ballots mailed in that were postmarked by Election Day, correct?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, next question is from Theo Keith. Theo, feel free to unmute.
Hi, Secretary. This first one might be a real quick one. The 338,000 outstanding absentee ballots. You have any guess as to how many of those people are voting today, tomorrow, or ballots in the mail? Any guess?
You asked the central question, and I just don't know. It depends on so many factors. I wouldn't even want to speculate.
Okay. Second one, with this Eighth Circuit case lingering, all these questions about counting late arriving absentee ballots, with the DOJ coming in, I'm just wondering, it's election eve, what is the Secretary of State's biggest concern?
Well, my biggest concern overall is that all validly cast ballots by Minnesotans be counted, period. That's it. That's the whole game. And I'm committed to making sure that they are. And that might mean showing up for post-election litigation initiated by someone else who wants to invalidate those ballots. So we, meaning our office and the Attorney General's office, will be there if and when that happens. I hope it doesn't. I hope it doesn't for a lot of reasons. And maybe mathematically speaking, it will be, the results will moot any need to go forward and do that. But that's my number one concern. I want to make sure that everyone who voted under the rules as they were established for months in Minnesota gets the opportunity to vote.
Thank you, Secretary Simon. One more question from Amy with the Associated Press. To follow up on Esme's question, to be clear, if someone wants to invalidate the presidential race, does that invalidate the entire ballot up and down in all the races, or would the other races still count?
Well, it's a great question. And there is another area where I wish the Eighth Circuit had been more explicit. Maybe they felt they didn't need to reach that issue yet, and then it was premature. You know, I don't judge their motives on that, but there is no clarity on that issue. Our argument would be and will be that it should only apply, if at all. Shouldn't apply at all, we would argue, of course, but if it applies, it should only apply to that one contest and not the rest of the ballot. Again, I don't know what this court is going to do, but our strong, strenuous argument will be to limit its effect, if there's any effect, only to the presidential contest.
Thank you, Secretary Simon. Looks like we are caught up for questions. I've just included my contact information. Again, as I mentioned before, we have recorded this, and if you'd like a copy of it, just shoot me an email and I will send that out to you. And if any questions come up later on, feel free to reach out to me directly. And while I have you all here, certainly for election day and election night interviews and coverage, feel free to reach out to me directly. Any last words, Secretary Simon?
Yeah, other than that, we've been talking about, you know, some potential setbacks and all the rest, but I have to say I am mostly an optimist. I really am. I am by nature, and I am as to the election. Minnesotans always find a way to vote. That is true. That is a historical fact. And there is so much excitement and energy out there right now. And so I want to focus on making sure that on our last day of voting, not election day, but our last day of voting tomorrow, that we finish strong. We have as many people who want to vote, and afterwards, that we go into the post-election period, making sure that everyone who has voted validly and legally has their ballot counted for each and every office up and down the ballot. I'm optimistic we can get to that place. And that is, I think, what democracy demands and expects of us. And it's what I'm committed to. So
thank you, Secretary Simon. Thanks everyone for being here.
Thanks all.